improving productivity of oats. So it's both for hay and for grain. So last year we were only going to do sort of 9 varieties, which were dual purpose or grain varieties, but with some extra money from AgriFutures, we extended that to include some more hay only varieties as well. And so we thought we'd continue that through this year. So what we have is 13 different oat varieties, ranging in maturities, from Durack, which is our earliest flowering, through to this year we have Vass. Last year we had Forester, but it was just such a late maturing variety and really more for the high rainfall area. So it didn't even get through to panic or emergence completely in our plots. So we decided to cut that one out and go with a different variety this year. As well as those 13 varieties, we also have Scepter, Scepter wheat and Compass barley, so that we have a bit of an idea of how they rate in terms of development, rather than it just being a lot of the time we look at oats compared to oats. We wanted to actually see how it does compared to Scepter and Compass, where people are quite familiar with those sort of flowering times for their environment. So we have 2 different times of sowing. So in front of me is our earliest sown time of sowing. This year this was on the 22nd of April, and we decided to make sure that it established and got Robert to come out with a water truck as well, and we irrigated him with dripper hose, and then it rained not long after that. So it got a really nice establishment and started off really well. Our second time of sowing is just to the side here, and I believe it's 18th of May. Yep, 18th of May. So these 2 times of sowing are a little bit earlier than what we did last year, and that was in response to a lot of feedback where people said, oh, what happens if you sow it in April? What if you go a bit earlier? So last year it was the start of May and end of May, and we've just shifted it about a week earlier this year. And I mean, this year was the year to do it because we actually had that rainfall, that really good start. So last year we were really interested to see, because I hadn't done a lot of work with oats, whether we will be able to maintain our hay quality by sowing it early, because a lot of the research suggests that you're better off sowing it later to maintain hay quality. So we did our hay cuts. We also did harvest index cuts because we're also interested in what it does for the grain. And what we found, unsurprisingly, we got higher hay yields last year from earlier sowing, but we actually maintained our quality because it had such a sharp finish to the season. It didn't actually change much between the 2 sowing dates, but we were getting, from the first time of sowing, we were sort of averaging about 7 tonnes per hectare hay yield, whereas from the second one it was about 5.5. So we got a boost in yield without a reduction in quality in quite a dry finish to the season. So this trial is also at the Mid-North High Rainfall Zone site in near Tarlee as well, and we got similar results there, the difference being that was a much higher yield potential, and we actually got lower quality because we got better yields, much thicker stems, more stalky, and that showed through. So our biggest differences in hay yield, in hay quality came from our environment. So if you're pushing your yields a lot higher, then that's when we actually started to run in some issues with sowing it early. So the other treatment that we've got here is essentially what we've said, managed for grain and managed for hay. So the idea is to see whether we're able to manage a crop for grain, and then if we get frosted and we're not going to get any grain, can we cut it for hay and we're still going to maintain quality? So the way we managed those 2 plots is for grain we had a lower seeding rate, and for hay lower seeding rate than the hay plots, and then we also had a slightly different nitrogen management. So with the hay we applied all of it within the first 6 weeks, and with the grain we held off 2/3 of it and applied it once they'd started elongating. And what we found was that management didn't affect our hay yields very much. the biggest thing it affected last year was the stem thickness. And so here at the Mallee site, we were targeting 160 and 240 plants per metre squared, whereas at the high rainfall, we were targeting 240 and 320. And we actually applied more nitrogen at the high rainfall site as well because of a greater yield potential. So this year we've actually started to do some of our cuts last week. It's been looking better than it did last year, and I was pretty happy with the yields last year. Our compass plot, which I'm standing in front of, we got a hay yield last week of about 9 tonnes. So I had some people looking through before, didn't think that was quite, that it looks like it's 9 tonnes, but it's quite a thick canopy, much thicker than last year. So we sowed these on 9-inch spacings, these plots. Durack, which is our earliest variety. Over here is Durack, which is our earliest flowering. That one yielded 7.6 last week, and we actually cut it a little bit earlier than what we thought we would because I knew I wouldn't be able to get back here until today. And having a look, it's still probably okay. So I'm thinking of taking another cut to see how that hay quality might decrease over a week's difference in cutting date. Last year, as I said, we also did grain yield on these. We got some pretty severe frosts for some of our early flowering, and Compass was flowering at a similar time to Durack, which meant that we could have a look at how the sterility was different between the barley and the oat. And the oats, I think they have a bit of a wider flowering window than the Compass, and so the sterility was a lot lower. But we did see a lot more leaf damage from that, the frost that we had last year. Scepter did not yield very well from the first time of sowing because it got frosted, whereas the oats were yielding better than Scepter from the earlier time of sowing just because of that frost. Okay, so the last trial I'll talk about is a small trial here we've got where we're looking at I suppose the response to nitrogen of King Bale and Winteroo. So there's been, for those that don't know, King Bale is this new IMI-tolerant variety. So it's a single gene mutation from Winteroo, and the idea is that it will be available for sowing next year with a registration for Century, but it's not for in-crop application of IMIs. And so there hasn't been a lot of agronomic performance data on King Bale. So we got asked as part of the National Hay Agronomy Project to have a look at how it stacks up compared to Winteroo. So in my Saggett trial, it's been pretty similar. We're getting similar quality, similar yields across both sites, but we don't really have any response to nitrogen data. So both here and at the Mid-North High Rainfall Zone site, and also 2 sites over in WA, we have 3 different nitrogen rates, and just King Bale versus Winteroo. I suppose the only issue at both of my sites in SA is we're not working on a super nitrogen responsive soil. It's actually a pretty good soil to start with, so I'm not seeing huge differences in response to nitrogen of the 2. But I suppose the most important thing for us here is to see whether you manage it similarly to you manage Winteroo, or there's other things that you might need to take into consideration. So I've got the signs out for the 30, 60 and 90. So what do I have in front of me? So I've got King Bale 30 here, and that's Winteroo 30. So they're looking fairly similar to me. Behind me, if you want a direct comparison, here's Winteroo with 60 units, and here's King Bale with 60 units. So they're at similar growth stages. There might be a little bit difference in colour, but at the moment I think they're looking pretty similar data to what we were getting last year in our other trials.